Being recorded. Okay. Good evening and welcome. I'm Mila Stroganoff, and so very pleased you have joined the Friends of San Pedro Valley Park's Natural Sciences series. I'm the Programs Director and Field Trips Director and your host tonight. We have Danaé Mouton, a wildlife biologist, with us tonight to enlighten us on the condor, California Condor. It will be a wonderful lecture. Danaé is from the Ventana Wildlife Society and is a first-timer with our natural history lecture series. I am very pleased indeed that she is joining us tonight. I will introduce her in just a moment. I will add that at the end of tonight's lecture, we will have a Q&A session. There will be an opportunity to ask questions and read some comments that you, the attendees, will send in. Please write questions in the question section and comments in the chat, since both were working now that Adrian has fixed all of that. So we'll separate the two. This lecture is being recorded and will be posted to our website very shortly. Our website is friendsofsanpedrovalleypark.org. Also, while I have your attention, consider becoming a member and supporting the programming. I will be back in September as Adrian, our membership director and IT specialist, and I are taking the summer months off as we usually do. I have booked 3 summer children's programs, so check our website or the newsletter for information. These programs bring live animals to hear, see, and learn about. And just in case you have pen and paper in hand, these are the 3 programs. Wild Things will take place outdoors in the park, and this is San Pedro Valley Park in Pacifica, the corner of Ottstad and Linamar Boulevard. Wild Things will take place outdoors in the park in the Walnut Grove area on Tuesday, June 16th at 11 a.m. Porky Quirk the Bat Lady will be giving her program and bringing her cute little bats. And this will also take place in the visitor center, but on Tuesday, July the 7th at 11 a.m., which is supposedly a very good time for the bats. So, and the third event is the native bird connection with 3 birds, a couple of owls, and a bird, but that will be determined on the day of the event. This one will take place on Tuesday, July 28th at 1 p.m. and will also take place in the visitor center. Hope you got all that jotted down. And if not, you know, the newsletter and the website will help you out. And now I have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker. Danaé Mouton is originally from North Carolina and graduated from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill with a Bachelor of Science in Biology in 2017. She first fell in love with condors when she began working at Pinnacles National Park in 2019. She joined the Ventana Wildlife Society Condor crew as a biologist in October 2021. And Danaé began her wildlife career working with carnivores in Arizona and Idaho. She then became fascinated by birds after spending a season bird banding in Nova Scotia, Canada. Hometown. Yeah, okay. Canada, here we come. Since then, she's been involved in several endangered species monitoring projects, including snail kites in Florida, northern spotted owls in Marin County, California, and now California Condors here in Central California. So Danaé, take it away.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me to come speak today. California condors are probably my favorite topic to talk about in the world. So you've given me about 50 to 60 minutes to talk. I could probably keep you all here till midnight. So I'm not going to do that. But definitely, I want to leave you guys time for some questions at the end, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about condors because they are incredible birds. And yeah, I'm excited to share some information that some of you may or may not be familiar with already. But yeah, as mentioned, my name is Danaé Mouton. I'm a wildlife biologist at Ventana Wildlife Society. And let's get into California condors on the Central Coast, a journey of recovery and resilience. First things first, for those of you who aren't familiar with condors and California condors specifically, They are North America's largest land bird with a wingspan of 9.5 feet from tip to tip. They are New World vultures in the New World vulture family. So they're kind of along the same lines of Andean condors and turkey vultures that are found in North America and South America. Their scientific name is Gymnogyps californianus. They weigh anywhere from 18 to 25 pounds. Average is usually around 20 pounds. And then their lifespan is 70 plus years. And there's a question mark there because we don't actually know how long condors can live because we've never had a condor die of old age. So the oldest known condor is still alive. He is turning or just turned 60 this year, had a big celebration. His name's Topa Topa, and he lives at the LA Zoo. He's part of their captive breeding program. And he's 60. So we know they can live at least 60 years old. There are condors that are older than him. He's just our oldest condor with a known age. We know exactly what year he hatched in the wild. So 70 plus year lifespan in captivity. In the wild, that lifespan, the max lifespan is around 28 years. So unfortunately, they don't live quite as long in the wild, and we'll get into all of that. This is a fun little size comparison with some species that you all might be familiar with, like turkey vultures and bald eagles or golden eagles are similar size. And you can see the condor is about twice the size, almost 3 times the size of a turkey vulture, and still a good bit bigger than an eagle. So when you're looking for potential condor sightings out in nature, depending on where you are, that the kind of key thing to look for if you see a bird flying overhead is those 2 large white triangles on the underwing there. And you can compare that with a turkey vulture, which will have some whitish color on the underwing, but it's on the trailing edge of the wing. Whereas the condor, those white triangles are going to be on the leading edge of the wing. So that's a pretty good indication that you're seeing a condor. Condors can fly pretty similarly to eagles. So if you're looking for a bird with really flat, steady wings, really steady flight pattern, whereas turkey vultures usually hold their wings in kind of a V shape and they have a little bit more of a wobble to their flight as they're catching a thermal and kind of circling around. So those are some things to look for if you're watching a bird flying and try to figure out if it's a condor or not. And then this is kind of a helpful guide if you do see a condor to try to figure out kind of how old it is. So that bird on the left there is a juvenile condor. You can see it's still got some fuzziness on its face, and the face is completely dark, almost black in color, with a really dark, rich brown eye. And then in the middle there is a subadult condor. You can see some pink starting to come up on the neck and around the beak area, and that eye is starting to get a lot of red around the outside. And then when condors are adults, which happens at about 5 to 6 years old, they'll be fully pink, orange, yellow, that beautiful head color with a nice, beautiful red eye and their little black feathers in front of their eyes. So that's kind of the progression of coloration in a condor. So just because it has a pink head doesn't mean it's a condor. And you might see a condor that doesn't have a pink head that has a black head if it's a younger bird. And then I'll talk more about this later about tags and why we tag condors. But another great way to tell if you're seeing a condor or not is if you see tags on the wing, these brilliant, beautiful colored tags with numbers on them. And these tags help us to identify the birds and keep track of the birds. Every single condor gets a official number, which we call the stud book number. And that happens when they hatch from an egg, whether that's in captivity or in the wild, they get assigned a stud book number. And that is the number that we biologists refer to the birds as. You'll notice some of our birds do have nicknames, but for science purposes, we refer to the birds by their number. And so this tag color coding system helps us to be able to look at a condor quickly in the field and know exactly who that bird is. And you can actually practice doing this too. If you see a condor out in the wild, you can go to condorspotter.com and you can actually look, it'll kind of pull up a dialogue of colors and you pick what color tag you saw, and then you can pick from a list of numbers, and then you can figure out exactly what bird you saw, which is pretty awesome. And that website is available to anyone in the public. You can also just go on there for fun and click around and see what birds are in which flocks. which is kind of fun. And then another purpose of these vinyl identification tags is it's also how we attach radio transmitters and GPS transmitters to our birds to keep track of them. And I'll get into that more later of how we do that. A little bit more life history. Condors are obligate scavengers. That means that they only eat dead things. They don't have talons like eagles or other raptors do. They can't kill anything. Their strength is in their neck muscles, which they use to pull meat off of carcasses, but they only eat dead things. They have really sharp beaks to break open carcasses. They've got these crazy like linings on the inside of their mouth that are designed to grip meat and hold on to it so they can rip chunks off. They've got really great vision to help them find carcasses when they're flying up to 10,000 feet in the air. They can see really far distances and kind of watch for other scavengers like turkey vultures to see where a potential carcass might be. And then, yeah, I mentioned they have serrated tongues and some serrations on the top of their mouth as well to help them eat dead things. And their bald head also helps with that too. It keeps their feathers nice and clean. They can reach their heads and necks really far inside a carcass, and some of the carcasses they eat are pretty big, so that's really helpful. And they don't have to worry about all their feathers getting gunked up with some nasty, gross stuff that they eat. These are some wonderful pictures. Sorry if you're squeamish, maybe look away. But these are condors doing what they are meant to do in the wild, eating dead things. So they're eating a whale carcass there on the left, out on the coast in Central California, and a sea otter on the right there that had died and washed up on shore. And so this is all part of their natural diet, especially out on the coast. They're also eating things like sea lions or seals that wash up on shore. Farther inland, they eat anything that's dead, roadkill deer or wild pigs, anything that dies out on the landscape. They forage on a lot of land that's used for agriculture and ranching. So if a cow dies, they'll eat that as well. Yeah, they're not too picky as long as it's already dead. And then jumping into kind of a little bit about the organization that I work for, Ventana Wildlife Society is a nonprofit that was founded in 1977, originally to help with bald eagle reintroduction in the Central California coast area. Their mission is to conserve native wildlife and habitats through science, education, and collaboration. And the bald eagle reintroduction program was successful in Central California. And so in 1997, Ventana kind of transitioned from bald eagles to condors and became the first private nonprofit in California to start releasing captive bred condors. So a little history and some dates that I'll throw at you here. There won't be a quiz. You don't have to remember these dates, but if you like having a timeline, this one's for you. Condors were first listed as an endangered species in 1967. They were actually one of the very first species that went on the endangered species list when the Endangered Species Act became signed into law. Their numbers were in steep decline, and in 1987, there were no free-flying condors left in the wild. The last free-flying condor was captured in 87, and all of the remaining condors, of which there were only 27 left in the world, all of those condors were in captivity in the hopes of starting a captive breeding program and breeding the birds in captivity. At the time, condors had never been bred in captivity, so no one knew really if it would work. They had reason to believe that it would, but they didn't know for sure until it happened, and luckily it did. And thankfully, not too many years later, after the last free-flying condor was captured in 1992, captive bred condors were able to be re-released back into the wild in Southern California. 5 years after that is when Ventana Wildlife Society started releasing condors in Big Sur in the Central Coast. And then a couple years after that is when Pinnacles National Park came on board the project and also started releasing condors in the Central Coast. Those two different release agencies, the Pinnacles National Park and Ventana Wildlife Society, who I work for, we manage the same flock. So it's the same birds, just two different release sites. And then in 2006 was a pretty big milestone for the central flock in that we had our first condor nest in the wild in Big Sur. Unfortunately, that first nest wasn't successful, but the following year in 2007, we had our first successful wild nest, which is really exciting. And then to kind of give you some numbers of what a potential delisting would look like, or moving condors from critically endangered to endangered on the endangered species list. The recovery goal for the species is to have 2 disjunct self-sustaining wild populations of at least 150 birds each with at least 15 breeding pairs and 150 condors in captivity to keep going with the captive breeding program. So I love maps. I'm a visual person. So for those of you who are wondering where the condors are, this map shows the range of condors today and the different agencies involved with monitoring them. So we'll start with Central California there in the middle. That flock is co-managed, as I mentioned, by Ventana Wildlife Society, who I work for, and Pinnacles National Park. Down in Southern California, you can see kind of that range, the yellow that extends up into the Sierras there. That population is managed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and collaborations with Santa Barbara Zoo staff as well. And then all the way up near the top of the map, you can see a little small yellow bubble there for the Northern California flock. That's our newest condor flock in California. And that population is managed by the Yurok tribe and National Park Service, Redwoods National Park. There's also a population of condors in Arizona and Utah that is managed by the Peregrine Fund. And then there's also a population of condors down in Baja, Mexico that is managed through the partnership of a couple different agencies down there. But there's 5 basically total distinct subpopulations of condors right now. And in addition to that, there's also captive breeding happening. So a couple different zoos are partners with us with that. So Los Angeles Zoo breeds condors, San Diego Zoo Global, Oregon Zoo, and World Center for Birds of Prey in Idaho, which is managed by the Peregrine Fund. So all of these agencies, it's a lot of agencies involved in condor recovery, but they're all equally important partners and really key partners to condor recovery. So to get into some numbers and where we're at in terms of population, last year was a really exciting year because we ended 2025 at 607 total condors in the world, California condors, I should say, California condors in the world. And that was really exciting, reaching that 600 number. Almost 400 of those 600 are wild free-flying birds, which is pretty cool. You can see the breakdown there by population, about 100 birds in Arizona, Utah. We were at a little over 100 birds in Central California, about 100 birds for Southern California. That Northern California flock that I mentioned is the newest one, so it's still pretty small at just 25 birds. And then the Baja, Mexico population is about half the size of those other flocks at about 53 birds. We also had 16 chicks that fledged in the wild in 2025, which is pretty exciting. That's across all populations. And then we released a total of 46 captive bred condors in the wild just last year, which is pretty incredible, monumental effort from the captive breeding program and the wild condor management agencies. The total captive population is at 215, right, as of the end of 2025. So these numbers are as up to date as we can get. This graph is just showing the general trend of the condor population over the years since 2010. That blue line on top is total population. The red line is the wild birds, and the green line is the captive birds. So you can see captive birds have pretty much stayed status quo, which is the intention, and then the wild birds are increasing as we're releasing captive bred birds into the wild. So I'm going to kind of hone in on condor recovery in Central California because that's the flock that I work with and that Ventana Wildlife Society is responsible for managing. And so I can give you a lot more information about our birds specifically than I can other populations. But in general, a lot of the condor management agencies, we're all kind of doing the same things. We're just doing them with different birds in different areas. So you can kind of extrapolate what we're doing across multiple populations, but with a few caveats here and there. So our current condor population as of today is 112 birds. So you can see we dropped a little bit from that 117 that we had at the end of 2025. And then just kind of getting to some numbers of how things change over the years. Last year, we had 4 chicks, wild chicks that fledged from nests. This year, we're in the middle of nesting season, so it's a little too soon to say how many we have, but or we will have. But right now, we have 2 chicks in nests, and actually, as of today, I just found out we have a 3rd chick, so that's really exciting. This is all hot off the presses information, but we have 3 chicks in nests right now, and three eggs still yet to hatch. Last year in 2025, we released 13 captive bred juveniles. And this year we're slated to release 10. We haven't received those birds yet from the zoos, but we'll be receiving them in the fall. And then last year we had a total of 10 mortalities. And this year so far, we've had three confirmed mortalities, and we have another three birds that are currently missing in the wild that are presumed deceased. And so total, probably we're at about six dead condors this year so far, which is unfortunately not great, not how we wanted to start the year. But 112 is still a number that makes us all very happy to be over 100 birds. And then this graph is just showing over time since the program began in 1997 to last year, 2025, the California condor population. You can see there's a few years here and there where that population has dipped and it hasn't increased, but in general, every year we get more and more condors out there in the wild, which is great. And then you can also see that blue bar on top of the green is showing the number of wild fledged individuals in our population. And so you can see the proportion of blue is getting bigger and bigger each year, which is exciting because we're having more and more wild nesting condors. To kind of give you another little visual here of where things are located, we have three different release sites that we use and three different kind of management sites that we use in the Central California condor population. So the first one was the Big Sur Condor Sanctuary. That's where condors were first released in 1997, and birds were continued to be released there through 2014. 2003 is when Pinnacles National Park started their program there, and they built a release site there. They release birds there since 2003 and continue to release birds there every year, usually about 4 to 6 birds per year. And then the San Simeon release site is also managed by Ventana Wildlife Society. And that release site was built in 2015. And since 2015, that's been our primary site where we release captive bred condors into the wild. And similar to Pinnacles, we release about 4 to 6 birds every year. This is just another graph showing the number of birds released over the year and where they were released from. So just kind of a fun visual there. And you can see total, we've had 57 birds released from the Big Sur site over the years, 82 birds released from the Pinnacles release site, and 70 birds released from San Simeon over the years, which is a lot of birds. And that process kind of works in the photos shown on the right. So that top photo is all of the captive bred birds sitting in what we call a flight pen. When we get them from the zoos, they've been hanging out with each other at the zoo already, so they already kind of know each other. But we put them in this flight pen so that they can acclimate to the weather and the climate and get kind of used to the habitat that they're going to be released into. They also get a chance because you can see that that pen is pretty open in terms of they can see the outside world. That means the outside world can also see them. So we have a lot of wild condors that love to come check out the new birds in town when they show up. Those wild birds will perch on the pen or sit on the ground and interact with the birds in the pen. And so the birds in the pen get to know the locals, and they kind of ease into life in the wild by getting to know some of the birds they're going to be hanging out with as soon as they get out. That middle photo there is showing a live release event. We live stream all of our condor releases. So you can follow us, Ventana Wildlife Society, if you want to watch a condor release happen live. Last year's was particularly exciting because it was one bird went out and then there was a long pause, and then all of a sudden all the other birds ran out all together at once, which has never happened before. So that was really exciting. But it's always different every year. There's always something that happens that keeps it interesting. And we do what's called a soft release. So you can see in that photo there, that bird is just flying out of the pen, and it's flying out of a door that was opened remotely. So us biologists will be sitting in a little blind, and we have a little pulley system where we can open the doors. That means that the condors never see humans. It's not like we're just grabbing them and letting them go out into the wild. They get to choose when they leave the pen, and they can take their time. Sometimes it takes them more than a day. And so it kind of eases that transition into the wild, and it works really, really well for releasing birds into the wild from captivity. And then that last photo there is if all goes according to plan, those birds, once they're released, they'll start to build up their flight muscles. Because they were bred in captivity, they've never done long, sustained flights before, so it takes them usually a couple of months to build up those flight muscles. get nice and bulked up, get lots of free food that we put out for them, and start doing longer and longer flights. And then after usually about 6-ish months, they'll really be fully integrated into the wild flock. And that's kind of where we're at with last year's birds that we released. They're just now reaching the point where they've kind of explored the whole range of the Central Coast flock, and they're fully integrated into that wild population. Another big part of what we do is trapping and handling all of the wild birds. We do this for a number of reasons, primarily to replace the transmitters that we put on them. I mentioned those GPS and radio transmitters briefly before with the vinyl tags, but that is how we keep track of the condors, and that's how we know if a condor might be sick or it might be on a nest. And those are all really important things that we need to know. So we got to replace those transmitters. It depends on the type of transmitter, how often, but they're all battery powered in some way, shape, or form. So they all need to be replaced when those batteries die. When we have a bird in hand, we also do things like draw blood. We give them a full health check and health workup. We give them some vaccinations for West Nile virus as well as avian influenza. We do things like feather sampling. We work with some researchers that can use feather samples for a number of different reasons to give us some data about each individual bird. If there's any other big research projects going on, we'll conduct other sampling. And then since avian influenza, highly pathogenic avian influenza has become a bigger concern in the state and in the country as a whole, we've started doing avian influenza sampling as well every time we handle birds. And those are some photos there on the right of what holding a condor entails and looks like. And then on that photo on the far right is me attaching a tail transmitter to a bird that we do sometimes use tail transmitters in addition to those wing transmitters. So once the birds have working tags, we can now track them. And we do this in a number of different ways. The primary method we use is radio telemetry. So we put a radio tag on a condor that is constantly emitting a radio signal, and then us biologists or some of our lovely volunteers pictured there on the right go out into the field wherever the condors hang out, and we have a radio receiver and an antenna, and we use those to pick up the radio signals from the birds and figure out where they are, if they're moving around, and follow their movements that way. So every single bird in the population, our goal is to have everybody with a working radio transmitter on them. In addition to the radio tags, about 40% of our flock also has a GPS transmitter. Those are a little bit bigger, they're solar powered, and they are sending data to satellites, which then we can download in the office and look at where the birds have been. So we get a lot more fine-tuned, fine-scale data from those GPS than we do from radio telemetry. But GPS are very expensive, so we cannot have them on every single condor. And so the radio tags are a much cheaper alternative, and they still enable us to keep track of the birds. Also, when we're out tracking, we are trying to read those beautiful, colorful vinyl tags to identify birds. And we're also looking for things like wild feeding events. So those volunteers on the coast were actually watching some condors feeding on a sea lion carcass on the coast in Big Sur. We want to document when condors are feeding, what they're feeding on, as well as, watching whenever we see a condor, just watching them really closely. We can tell a lot about them by their behavior, and we can tell, most importantly, if they're sick or injured by their behavior. So that's something we're constantly looking out for. This is a fun map kind of showing how we can use the GPS data that we get from condors. Again, about 40% of the flock is fitted with GPS, and that enables us to look at things like the range of condors. So in recent years, especially, condors have begun to expand their range north and south in Central California. So all the way north up to Livermore, and then all the way south, almost down to Santa Barbara. And, if we don't have GPS on a bird, unless somebody out there happens to see the condor and is able to accurately identify it and tell us who it is, we have no way of knowing if the birds are going up there or not. So those GPS are really critical to helping us figure out where the birds are going and when they're starting to expand their range. It's also really useful in pinpointing when condors might be on the ground foraging, and it helps us target areas that are high risk for lead poisoning, which I'm going to talk about more in depth later. But we have a whole non-lead outreach program, and these things go hand in hand, condor tracking and non-lead outreach. And so this map here on the left, or sorry, on the right, is showing that general range, overall range in yellow, and then the core area from last year in the kind of red dashed shaded areas. That's where most of the condors are spending most of their time in that area. And then you can see those colorful little shapes there are showing feeding events that we were able to actually go out in the field and document visually, as well as all those little red dots are other feeding events that we were able to confirm with GPS. We weren't able to actually, a lot of them were on private property, so we couldn't actually see the condors feeding, but through GPS movements, we could figure out where the condors were feeding, which you can tell gives us a lot more data than just the ones we're able to confirm visually. And now we get into the fun stuff, condor nesting. I love talking about condor breeding season because it's so fun. There's always some crazy drama and shakeups that happen during the breeding season. If you watch any like reality TV shows about love and dating, the condors are way more interesting, I promise. There's always some crazy shenanigans going on. But their courtship season actually begins in December, so they have a really long breeding season and courtship season. And then you'll see things happen like that little GIF that's playing on the right there is a male condor displaying to his mate, a female. He's doing a nice little courtship dance where he spreads his wings out, puffs up all the air sacs in his face and his crop, and kind of does a beautiful little side to side sway. He kicks his feet up and looks very beautiful and impressive. And if the female is receptive to that, then they will potentially copulate afterwards. But we see a lot of displays that don't always result in anything, but they're just a way for males to try to impress a potential mate. And we do also see occasionally some females display as well. If all goes according to plan, condors will lay their eggs in February through April usually. Most eggs are laid in like February, March. Condors only lay one egg, so you can see that photo in the bottom there is a female with her one avocado-sized egg. They typically nest every other year because of how long their breeding season is, although there are a couple pairs of pinnacles that are the exception to that have decided to start breeding every year, which we're not complaining about. They use a couple different types of nests, both cliff nests or cliff cavities, as well as redwood cavities out on the coast. So you can see that photo on the left there is two adult condors inside of a redwood cavity that we actually have a live streaming camera inside of. And you can see both of those adults barely fit in there, but they do. And then that photo on the right, the bottom right there is a nest at Pinnacles. So just a nice cliff ledge there where that egg was laid. You can tell they don't really build a nest. They just plop it right there on the nest substrate. So either right in the middle of the redwood cavity or right on a rocky ledge or crevice. Once the egg is laid, it is incubated by the parents for 57 days approximately, so almost 2 months before it hatches. And then once it hatches, it's going to be in the nest for 6 months on average until that chick is ready to fledge. Once it fledges or leaves the nest, it's still dependent on the parents for another 6 months after that, at least. So you can tell, 2 months for an egg to hatch, and then you've got a year of chick rearing for the parents. So that's why their breeding season is so long, and that's why they typically nest every other year. And I should mention too, we do also have some condors that choose to breed in trios rather than pairs, so 3 birds together. We have trios that are 2 males and a female. We have trios that are 2 females and a male. It's a really cool breeding strategy called cooperative breeding that I'm hoping to publish a paper on in the coming months/year. But really fascinating, and condors are a really cool case study of cooperative breeding in wild birds. Some things we do to keep track of nests and to monitor them. Ideally, if we can, we try to monitor them visually, which means going out into the field, finding the nest, setting up a scope and tripod the old-fashioned way, and sitting and watching for hours on end. It's really fun. If we can find a nest and we can get a vantage point to see into it, we absolutely will. We do also have remote cameras that we can use, that we can install in a nest and then be able to watch that footage remotely without having to trek out into the wilderness to be there in person. And then with Ventana Wildlife Society, we don't do any nest entries in redwood nests out on the coast, but at Pinnacles National Park, their crew still does nest entries on cliff nests within the park boundaries. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Southern California also does nest entries on their nests. Those nest entries are primarily to assess the chick health and make sure that the chick is progressing normally, looks to be in good health. They'll give it some vaccines, they'll draw blood for genetic testing and things like that. And then when the chick is old enough, at about 120 days old, they'll actually tag the chick while it's still in the nest because it'll be adult sized at that point. So they can put its wing tag on while it's still in the nest. And that way, when it leaves the nest, we're already able to track it, which is amazing. Otherwise, we have to wait for the chick to show up at one of our release sites and trap it to put its tag on. So these are some photos of different wild fledged chicks different chicks and wild fledglings over the years. That photo on the left there was, I think, just like a day or two after that chick hatched. So you can still see there's like a little white dot on the tip of its beak. That's the egg tooth that it used to break out of the eggshell, which is pretty cool. Obviously being very carefully attended to by the parent there. And then the middle photo is when that chick is probably reaching, close to 120 days old. So you can see it's starting to grow in flight feathers and lose a lot of that very fluffy, downy feathers. And then the photo on the right there is a chick that is already fledged and it's fully the same size as the adult, just as big as the adult, and it's got all its flight feathers in, learning how to fly and getting a wonderful meal from the parent there. If you can't tell, I just love visualizing data here. So this graph is showing the number of eggs and hatches and fledglings that we've had over the years. Basically, in Central California, we have about a 50% hatch rate, so about half the eggs that are laid hatch, and then about a 40% fledge success rate, so about 40% of the eggs that are laid will make it to fledgling stage. You can see what's really fun is in 2024, that section that I highlighted in red there, we actually had a pretty big milestone where we had 9 total fledglings in Central California, which was the most we've ever had by a long shot. You can see that the green bar is the number of fledglings. So if you just look at the green bars, you can see 2024 was a really good year for nesting. And there was actually also the first year that wild births exceeded deaths in a single year in the population, which is really exciting when we're looking at things like long-term recovery. In order for the population to be self-sustaining, we have to have that positive growth rate. And that means that wild births have to exceed wild deaths in a single year. So 2024 was the first year that happened. Unfortunately, 2025 was not as great of a year. And this year, unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to get as many nests. But when we get years like 2024, we all get very excited. So to kind of dig into some individual birds, I won't get too into the nitty gritty, but if you're interested in this, definitely I'll share some resources with you later. But right now we're in the middle of our 2026 nesting season. So far this year, we've had 8 total nest attempts. That means 8 eggs were laid. We had 10 last year, so a little less than last year. And then so far we've had 3 eggs hatched. That number is wrong as of today. 3 eggs hatched, and we had 6 eggs hatched last year. So Ventana Wildlife Society manages and monitors all of the nests out on the coast. And then Pinnacles National Park manages the nests inside the national park as well as on private property kind of immediately surrounding the national park. So with Ventana, we have 4 nests we're monitoring right now, 2 of which are chicks and 2 of which are still eggs. We haven't been able to confirm hatching on those, but both of those were due to hatch earlier this year. So we're hoping they've hatched. We're just waiting a little while to confirm that. And then the Pinnacles crew is monitoring 2 different nests, one of which just they confirmed the hatch today, which was really exciting news. And the other is a trio nest. So 3 birds are involved. That's actually them pictured there on the right. There's 2 females and a male in that trio, and they're just the cutest. Look at them. They love each other. I love it. They're doing something called allopreening there, where they preen each other and nibble at each other's faces. It helps keep each other clean, and it's kind of how condors show their affection for one another. And they have an egg as well. They might have 2 eggs because there are 2 females in that trio, but unfortunately, it's a nest that Pinnacles can't access, and so we haven't been able to confirm. So it's a bit of a mystery and a bit of a surprise if we'll see 1 or 2 chicks, or maybe no chicks, but hopefully at least 1 chick show up in that nest pretty soon. And now we got to talk about the less fun stuff, but it's really important to talk about. So mitigating threats. the biggest thing with condors is their mortality rate is really high right now, and that's the biggest roadblock to their recovery. And the main reason for that is lead poisoning. So for those of you who aren't aware, lead poisoning is such a threat because condors are obligate scavengers. They're only eating things that are dead on the landscape, and that includes things that are shot with a bullet. The primary type of metal used in bullets and ammunition is lead. And so condors are getting lead poisoning from consuming carrion that has lead fragments in it. You can see that ballistics gel on the right there, that kind of middle pathway. All those little white dots are lead fragments from a bullet that was shot through the ballistics gel. And so that's happening in a carcass, an animal that is shot, whether it's, someone hunting deer or, they have to manage coyote populations on their ranch. Anytime an animal is shot with a lead bullet, all of those little fragments are ending up in the carcass, and that's what the condors are eating and getting lead poisoning. Lead poisoning is a terrible illness. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It's really horrible, and I won't go into it all here. If you want to know more about it, I am happy to answer questions on it, but it's not a pretty picture, and it's really, really hard to see. And unfortunately, those of us in the crew have had to see it a lot over the years, and it's pretty heartbreaking. But it is important for us to document because we need to know why condors are dying so that we can help prevent them from dying. And so every time a bird dies, we do our best to go out into the field and find it, find out where it died, and get to it if we can. We'll send it in for a necropsy, and we'll end up with something with that pie chart on the left-hand side, which is showing all of the known causes of mortality in the free-flying condor population since condors were released into the wild in 1992. So you can see 50% of all mortalities are lead. There are a number of other things on the left-hand side of that pie chart. Some of those are likely also related to lead. They just weren't the primary cause of death. So things like drowning. Birds, when they get really lead sick, they go straight to a water source because they get really thirsty. They're really dehydrated. And a lot of times they're just so weak, they'll fall into the water and they can't get out and drown. So the primary cause of death is drowning, but lead is also probably a factor there. So lead is a pervasive issue. And you can see the photos on the right there are kind of hard to look at, but those are birds that were in treatment. That radiograph is showing a lead bullet, actually an entire bullet that was ingested by a bird. And that picture at the bottom is what the bullet looked like outside of the bird. But it takes a big toll on them, even if they survive a lead exposure. It is really hard on their bodies, and over time, if they get exposed again and again, eventually they get a dose that they just can't recover from. So what are we doing about it? Ventana Wildlife Society started a free non-lead ammunition program in 2012. And since that program began, we've been giving out free non-lead ammo to anyone who hunts or ranches or shoots anything in condor habitat. There are non-lead options out there, and lead bullets are actually banned for the take of any animal in the state of California. But unfortunately, non-lead is not as readily available as lead is. Lead is still being sold in stores. It's still legal to use for target practice and things like that. And there's a combination of, a lack of education and a lack of availability happening. So we haven't seen a decrease in lead poisoning in condors yet. But we've distributed over 18,000 boxes of free non-lead ammunition, as well as distributing that to over 3,000 different individuals across 6 different counties. So it's a pretty massive effort, and that's really, the best thing that we can do to reduce lead poisoning in condors is to help hunters and ranchers and anyone shooting anything to make the switch to non-lead ammunition. Some other threats that we deal with condors is things like disease. So all of our condors are vaccinated for West Nile virus. And then more recently in 2023, there was a huge outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza in the Arizona-Utah condor population that killed 21 condors, which was a huge devastating blow to their flock. And so as a result, the whole condor program really kicked into gear and came up with a game plan for how to prevent that from happening in other populations. And so in 2024, we began vaccinating our flock for avian influenza. And as of this year, about 90% of our Central California flock is vaccinated for avian influenza. the highly pathogenic version. So it is, definitely, as many of you have heard, showing up in marine mammals and things like that too. And a condor that feeds on a marine mammal that might have died from avian influenza is prime to pick that up from them. So it's something we're all on high alert and aware of and keeping a close eye on. But these are wild birds, and unfortunately, H-Pi is here to stay. It's around. It's not going anywhere. So it's something that we're just incorporating into management going forward. You can see that photo at the bottom there of one of our wonderful local vets, Dr. Amy Wells from the Avian Exotic Clinic, delivering an H-Pi vaccination to a bird. And then on the right there, we also built 8 quarantine pens at the Monterey SPCA and 2 at Oakland Zoo. In the event of an outbreak and we have to take birds into captivity and quarantine them, we wanted to have some pens already built and ready to go in case that happens. So that was a huge fundraising effort, and thankfully we have those ready to go if we need them. Fire is also a big concern. Many of you probably heard about, remember the 2020 Dolan fire. That was arson caused. It came through, burned through much of Big Sur in August 2020. We lost 12 birds, 12 wild condors in the fire, including 2 chicks in their nests. And our entire flight pen there is pictured on the right, completely destroyed, as well as our cabin that we used to have researchers stay in. All of our cameras were burned. It was a pretty devastating year. But thankfully, we bounced back really well thanks to a huge, massive support from a lot of donors. We just completed the Big Sur cabin, was just finished in 2025. Our flight pen was actually finished a bit before that. But that's the flight pen there on the right, and us biologists putting it together. And it is fully functional and up and running. We had a great trapping season last year. So we're kind of back in recovery mode following that fire. But fire is also just a part of the landscape and something that we are, dealing with all the time, and the birds deal with it too. So I wanted to kind of end on, what does condor recovery look like this year and beyond? And going back to our timeline and talking about what a goal for condor recovery looks like. We're still not at our goal of having a self-sustaining population of 150 birds and 15 breeding pairs in Central California. We're getting close. We're at 112 birds, so we're creeping closer and closer to that 150 number. But we don't have 15 breeding pairs yet, and that population is not self-sustaining. Self-sustaining means that the number of wild chicks produced has to exceed the number of mortalities, and we've only had 1 year so far where that has been the case. So we're still working towards that goal. And our main focus is really reducing lead poisoning, reducing mortality in condors. And we're doing that by increasing hunter participation in our free non-lead ammunition program. We're really trying to get that non-lead ammunition into the hands of people who are hunting and ranching in prime condor habitat. We're using our GPS data from the birds to figure out where they're feeding and then reaching out to those property owners to try to get them some free non-lead ammo. And the ultimate goal with all of this, the ultimate vision, is a wild condor population that doesn't need humans. One day I hope to work myself out of a job one day. That is what we all joke about it, but it is the truth. We all do this because we want to see a day where we don't have to do our jobs because the birds are doing just fine without us, when we don't need to intervene on their behalf. Having condors out there without tags is kind of, it's bittersweet because we won't be able to know all the birds as well as we do now, but it also is the ultimate goal to have wild condors flying around without any tags on them. And I wanted to leave you with a few more ways that you can, if you were interested in this and you just want to nerd out on condors like I do every day, you can watch our live streaming condor cams. They're on explore.org. They're pretty easy to find. You can also find them on our website. We had our first nest cam went live in 2018, and we got to watch a condor grow up live in a redwood nest, which was amazing. But we have some cams pictured there on the left is our cam at our Big Sur release site, so you can see all the birds hanging out at the water hole there. We put out carcasses for them to help with management and to help with trapping birds as well. And so you can see condors doing what condors do and turning a carcass into food and nutrition. And you can also just watch the social hierarchy in action, all the birds interacting with each other. It's fascinating. I watch it all the time. It's better than TV, I promise. And we also do have a live streaming nest camera. Those photos on the right there are of us installing that Nest camera inside the redwood tree, which is always easier said than done. And then that photo in the middle is the view inside the nest of two adults sitting in there. Unfortunately, we did not have a female lay an egg in that nest this year, but a lot of females are showing interest in it, and we have had one female use it many years in the past. So we were hoping she would use it this year, and she chose not to. But definitely next year there should be a nest in there, and we'll keep that camera going. And we might set up another one if we're able to on one of our active nests this year. So stay tuned for that. Um, yeah, you can also make an account on explore.org and post comments and questions. We have wonderful volunteers who look at our Nest camera footage and keep track of which birds are showing up at which site. So if that interests you, definitely, join the group there and get involved. And then we also do a monthly Condor chat. Ventana Wildlife Society does every single month, the last Thursday of every month from 4 to 5 p.m. Anyone in the public can join. It's totally free. You can sign up on our website. It's similar to this, where you just get a link for the Zoom. And then it's kind of, Joe Burnett, who's the program manager, is on there. One of us biologists will usually be there. And Mike Stake, our awesome non-lead outreach coordinator, he usually fields all our question and answers, but it's just a fun chance to catch up with what's happening with the birds. We get a lot more into specifics of individual birds, and filling everyone in on all the drama that's happened since the last update, especially right now during nesting season. There's always some fun stories to talk about. And yeah, it's totally available to the public if that's something you're interested in. We also record them and share them on our YouTube page as well, so you don't have to watch them live. And with that, I just want to thank all of our partners. We definitely could not do this alone. There's so many different agencies that help with condor recovery, both, with our flock and across all the other populations. So a huge shout out to everyone involved with captive breeding, with the wild monitoring. It's all one big family. We're all doing it for the love of the birds, and we all have the same goal in mind. And lots of very wonderful, dedicated people involved in condor recovery. I can tell you from personal experience with all of them, they're great, great humans. And with that, I'll leave you with my email there at the bottom of the screen. If you want to reach out to me, definitely feel free. But if there's time now, I'm also happy to answer questions. And yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in on this wonderful Tuesday evening and giving me the opportunity to talk about my favorite topic. So thanks so much.
Um, Side by side, maybe?
I'm back. I'm just trying to get my view back here. Just
Maybe try side by side, up. No.
Just a sec. Ah, no. Yeah. Well,
Do you want
while
me to
I'm
stop sharing my screen?
yeah, that would be fine.
Let's do that.
Let me see if I can get short gallery view. We don't want a gallery view. Speaker view. Yes, we got speaker view. Sort gallery by short self view. Okay, well, I'm up there. That's fine. Okay, so that was great. That was truly fascinating. Learned a lot. Oh, let me see. We have questions. So I'm going to go to let's have a look. These were the initial echo problems and sound problems. So let's see. Let's move on. My Condor plushie from Pinnacles is watching with me. So someone's got a fan, plushy little one.
I love that. I have one of those too.
They're great. Yeah. It says here a couple of years ago, a few condors were seen. What happened to that? We're seen around Mount Diablo. I haven't heard anything since. Are birds still around Mount Diablo? Do we know where those birds went by any chance?
Yeah, so we have had a couple birds go up to Mount Diablo over the years. I should have put a slide in there. I have a fun map about that I didn't include, but yes, we do have documented birds going up there. It is typically going to happen during the summer months, so we're kind of getting up on the time where that might be a possibility when the days get longer. The weather is a bit warmer. The condors just have more time in their day to move around and kind of do what we call exploratory flights, where they're not really foraging. They're just kind of flying around and looking at things, and they can go really far. They can fly up to like 200 miles in a single day. And so definitely Mount Diablo is a spot that we've seen condors go up to. We don't have any condors that are really hanging out there or like establishing territories up there for breeding or anything like that yet. But obviously it is a prime spot for that in the future. So it is really encouraging that we've been seeing birds go up there at all. And yeah, we definitely, it seems like the past, I want to say like 3 or 4 years, we've had birds go up every single year. They don't usually stick around too long, maybe like a day or two, and then they come back. But sometimes it's the same bird that's been going up there multiple times. I know 943 is a pinnacles bird that has done that flight a couple times. There's another female that did last year that I'm blanking on who it was now. But yes, definitely they're exploring more and more and expanding their range farther and farther. And so hopefully one day in the future that will become part of their core range and they'll be visiting more regularly. But if you're up in that area, definitely in the summer months, if you're out and about, keep your eyes to the skies. And if you see a condor, let us know.
Okay. So why did I go back here? So somebody is asking, what is it? Why do we have to care about condors? What do they control the rodent population? Somebody must have missed the part about the advantage of condors and what they actually do and how they help.
Yeah. So I'm happy to talk about that more. But condors are super important for the landscape in a number of ways. Um, Primarily, they're scavengers. So they're eating dead things on the landscape, which is reducing disease. So, if a carcass sits around on the landscape and it's rotting and it's, spreading disease and contaminating water supplies and things like that, the longer that carcass sits on the landscape, the more likely disease is to spread. So scavengers in general are really critical for that. And condors, due to their size, are really effective scavengers. I showed some photos of condors feeding on a whale carcass. Something as big as a whale carcass washing up on the shore, a turkey vulture can't even begin to know what to do with that. They can't break into the carcass. The blubber is super thick. And condors are big enough and strong enough to break into these larger carcasses, even things like elk or a full adult cow that have really thick hides that are hard to break into. Condors can do that really easily. And so they're kind of making those carcasses, not only are they consuming a lot of meat, but they're also making those carcasses then available for smaller scavengers to come in and kind of clean up the bits and pieces. And so that carcass is just on the landscape for a lot less time. And that's reducing disease, which affects human populations as well. So it kind of has this cascading effect throughout the ecosystem, which is really crucial. And then another reason why they're really important is also just culturally to a lot of the indigenous cultures, both here in Central California as throughout the state. Condors, this is, the whole state of California is part of their natural range and where they lived very happily before European expansion across the US. And so, for a lot of those indigenous cultures, condors are a very important part of that. And it's very important to have condors on the landscape to be symbols of that culture and to fulfill that role in human society as well as in their ecosystems that they're a part of. So there's many different reasons. They're also just wonderful, fascinating birds that we're learning more and more about every single day. There's so much that we still don't know about them, and so having wild condors out there to study and research and observe while they're doing their natural behaviors for someone like me is a really exciting opportunity, and it just enables us to learn more about the natural world. So that's just a few of the reasons why condors deserve to be out there on the landscape. But you can keep me on here, I could keep going. So I'll end there. But yes, they're very important for the landscape.
Well, they're definitely part of the biodiversity and they should be there by all means. I mean, just because we're around doesn't mean no one else has to be around. It's lovely to have all of them, and they're spectacular when you see them in a flock. Adrian and I were lucky enough to see a flock go up with which one's the
Big Sur.
At Big Sur. They went up,
Mm.
and it was a half hour of just magic, just
Yeah, it's
magic.
pretty indescribable seeing a condor in the wild. I highly recommend going to Pinnacles National Park if you haven't been in the wintertime. Don't go in the summer when it's really hot and horrible. If you go in the winter, it's cooler, there's less people there, and also it's the condor courtship season. So you get to see condors displaying to each other in the high peaks and pinnacles. It's incredible. I highly recommend going if you can, or you can also drive down the coast along Highway 1 in Big Sur. You still are likely to see condors there. They're just a little bit more spread out. So I recommend kind of finding a good spot to just sit and take your time and observe. And chances are throughout the course of a day, you'll be able to see a condor flying by. But it is, I mean, as someone who gets to see condors pretty often because it's my job, I still, every time, it's still an incredible experience. And I'm a very emotional person. So it still brings tears to my eyes seeing birds fly around and seeing a bunch of birds flying together, especially, is really cool when you think about there only being 27 condors left in the whole world. And we have 112 in our population now. And I've seen more than 27 condors in a single sighting flying together. And so it's just so incredible to think about how far they've come. And yeah, they're truly awe-inspiring. If you get to see one close enough, you'll hear the wind whistling through their wing feathers, and it's just yeah, there's nothing else like it, I can tell you. So I definitely recommend it if you can try to get out there and see a condor.
Do you have any hypothesis of why 2024 was such a great year in terms of
Mm,
success
yeah,
with mm,
that's a great question. I think a number of things. I think yeah, there was definitely more. We noticed a lot of coastal feedings happening that year too. So I think there was more carcass availability. The food supply was probably a little bit better. We just didn't have as much mortality from lead poisoning, which is kind of rare. That I don't know what to attribute to be honest, because since then it hasn't. We have had a lot of lead mortality since then. So unfortunately, we were hoping it would be kind of a good upward trend, and it hasn't gone that way. Um, but yeah, it kind of was a number of factors. And then, we had a good number of nest attempts, but our nest success was just really high. Like a lot of the eggs that were laid ended up all hatching, or not all of them, but most of the eggs that were laid ended up hatching, which usually it's about 50% hatch rate. So yeah, I think, whatever was going on, the parents were just being extra good at incubating, and maybe they had a little more food availability out there on the landscape, so they just were able to spend more time at the nest or able to provide more food for the chicks. And yeah, it's hard to know exactly what, but that'll definitely be something we look into, and we kind of are able to look at all the data that we have, because we are collecting so much data on a day-to-day basis that yeah, we'll definitely be looking back at that as kind of a trademark banner year that we want to happen again. But it wasn't anything that we really did differently. So unfortunately we can't replicate it. But the birds just nailed it in 2024. So hopefully that'll happen again next year. We'll
they get
see.
a gold medal for 2024,
Yeah.
definitely.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes.
Uh, Anything with wind turbines? Do they get in trouble
Mm,
with the wind turbines a lot and with PG&E wiring and
mm. Yeah, we haven't had any birds killed by wind turbines, knock on wood. We do have some agreements with some of the companies that are, putting up turbines. There's some different agreements there happening that kind of basically allow a certain amount of take, and they provide funding for the captive breeding programs and things like that. So it kind of it works out well for us, because we get funding for what we need to do and the work we need to do to breed more condors. And to date, we have not had a condor die in a wind turbine collision. Condors fly pretty high, so they're not as much a risk as some other species are. And there's also technology being developed with like AI to identify condors. Like there's cameras at the wind turbine sites that will shut off the turbines if the camera identifies a condor flying close by and things like that. So yeah, wind turbines are not as much of a concern. Power lines definitely have been in the past, and occasionally still today continue to be. So we do work with PG&E if we have a condor collision with a power line, there's a whole investigation that happens. And then usually PG&E will underground that power line. There was one in Big Sur when birds first started getting released in Big Sur. There was a prime one in Big Sur that several birds hit. And so that line was undergrounded as a result. And thankfully, we haven't had any other collisions out on the coast. But it can happen for sure. And it has happened in the history of the program. But it's not, our primary threat. It's not a huge concern. And luckily PG&E, I mean, they don't want condors hitting the power lines either. So they're pretty good about listening if it happens and undergrounding those lines.
The condor per se doesn't make any sounds, does it? I mean, does it vocalize?
Oh, yes, they do.
Oh, they do? They do?
Yes, they do make noises. So you're correct in saying that they don't vocalize in terms of other birds because they don't have basically a voice box. They're not able to produce a song like other birds are, but they do make some amazing noises that are mostly a combination of hisses and grunts and some crazy kind of screechy dinosaur pig squeal noises. We had one female at Pinnacles that whenever we entered her nest, she would come fly in and just make these crazy, I can't even replicate them, but just really, you felt like you were in Jurassic Park, like just crazy dinosaur screeching sounds because she was annoyed that we were in her nest. But yeah, they can make noises. They just can't vocalize, so they don't sing songs or call to one another. But they do hiss at each other for sure. If they're annoyed at each other, they grunt. They make some fun noises.
And do you folks, or maybe initially earlier on in the program, did you try taking eggs away from the nest, hoping for the female to lay another egg, or does it not happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't touch on that too much, but yeah, so in the early days of wild nesting, they did what's called cross fostering, where they would take the wild egg that was laid, they would take it out of the nest and they would put a dummy egg in its place. And the wild pair would continue to incubate the dummy egg as if it was the real egg. Meanwhile, the real egg would be taken to one of the captive breeding facilities. It would be hatched and cared for in an incubator with the teams there. So they would make sure that it hatched healthily. And then around the time that the egg was due to hatch, they would replace the dummy egg in the wild nest with a captive laid egg. So egg that was laid by a captive breeding pair. And they would put that egg they would wait till it was like right about to hatch. And then they would put it back in the wild nest and allow the wild pair to help that egg hatch. And that chick would then be raised in the wild. And so the kind of reasoning for that is that hatch success was really low in the early days of the program. And so that was a way to kind of ensure that an egg would hatch and also give the wild birds that breeding experience, give them experience raising a chick so they could get better and better at doing that and continue to nest successfully on their own. And that worked really well. That was done for several years across all the populations. Now we don't do that anymore just because the birds are doing fine on their own. 50% hatch success is pretty normal in the bird world. That's not a super low number. And so we're not really worried about trying to boost wild reproduction as much as we're worried about reducing mortality in the adult birds and wild birds. So yeah, there definitely was a lot more invasive kind of nest management happening in the early days of the program. Not as much anymore. If we had a major concern or something with a chick, we might evacuate that chick. If there was some health concern, we could evacuate that chick and it could be raised in captivity. But in general, we just try to let the wild birds do what they do best. And it really is better for them in the long run because they really get that breeding experience and they're, successful the next time around. Even if their nest fails one year, it might be because they picked a bad nest spot and we don't really want them to nest there again. So they kind of need to learn through trial and error, like, oh, that probably wasn't a great place to lay my egg because a predator came into the nest and ate it. So next year they'll choose a different nest, or sometimes the same year they'll retry the same year and choose a different nest. So yeah, that's kind of why we've gotten away from doing that to some degree. But yeah, that was definitely part of the early management.
But with the fires that you mentioned, or the fire that in Big Sur, um, the the condors can't fly away, or do they not wish to leave? I mean, these are birds that fly great distances, and can they not physically, do they not manage to leave the fire area to fly somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We've had wildfires in the past previous to 2020. And occasionally, a bird or two will die in the fire. But really what was happening with the Dolan fire in 2020 was that it was moving super quick, it was burning super hot, and it burned through the Big Sur Condor station in the middle of the night. And so condors can see really far distances. They have really good eyesight, but their dark vision is pretty much the same as ours. They can't see as well in the dark because they don't need to, right? Evolutionarily, there was no reason for them to adapt really good dark vision because they forage during the day and they need the thermals to get updraft anyway during the day. So they're a daytime diurnal species. And so their night vision is not very well developed, so they can't see well at night. And for a bird as big as they are, if they were to fly at night, if a threat is happening, their strategy is just to stay put and to not move. Because if they fly at night when they can't see where they're landing. If they have a bad landing, they fall, they could break a wing, they could break a leg. So ultimately that's kind of what happened is they saw the fire, they knew it was there. But their strategy is, well, it's nighttime, I gotta just stay put. And unfortunately, that's when the fire burned through the sanctuary. And that is a place where a lot of condors congregate and tend to roost together. They're a communal species where they feed and roost in large groups. And so unfortunately, there was just a bunch of birds all together. We did have several birds after the fire that were observed with severe burns, some of which we took into captivity for treatment. So there was definitely another, I would say probably at least 10 other birds that were there that night that were exposed to the fire and that did fly away, and thankfully survived. Or they might have just been in a better area that they were able to kind of avoid the worst of the fire. But yeah, we saw some crazy like facial burns and scarring and stuff on birds that survived the fire. So a lot more birds were there that night than the 12 that died. But unfortunately, those 12, for whatever reason, either they might not have even tried to fly, or maybe they did try to fly and they just couldn't see well. The fire light was probably very disorienting, and the heat from the fire was probably causing some weird air currents that they aren't used to navigating on a day-to-day basis. So we won't know exactly what happened ever because our live streaming cameras burned in the fire as well. But yeah, it definitely was kind of a bad recipe for disaster there with the fire burning through the sanctuary. I think it was at like 3 a.m. or something. It was in the middle of the night. So yeah, unfortunately, wildfire is always a thing, and condors have evolved with fire-prone landscapes for a long time. So, normal wildfires are not necessarily a threat to condors, but given, land management and stuff over the years, as many of you know, we've just had bigger and bigger, more catastrophic fires than is what is considered, quote unquote, natural fire ecology for the landscape.
They burn too hot and very intensely and very quickly.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But with the non-lead ammunition, do even though you have this wonderful program where you're dealing with the farmers and other people who are shooting and handing out these non-lead bullets, do they actually use the non-lead bullets? I mean, have you had proof of the fact that they're actually changing from lead to non-lead?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is happening on private property, so we're not going out there and, policing people and making sure they're using it, but we do have a lot of people in our program that come back, I think it's every month they're given a certain quota depending on where you are in Condor country and how high priority your property is or where your hunting or ranching is. But yeah, we have return customers coming back again and again. So they're either stockpiling it for no reason or they're using it. But a lot of people, anecdotally, a lot of people are very grateful for it and are using it. because we have some calibers that really aren't available on the shelves. Unfortunately, the manufacturers just aren't quite up to speed with the demand for it, and also, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of pressure on manufacturers right now for them to produce more of it and develop better bullets and more calibers. So it is hard to find for some people. So we carry a lot of weird specialty types of bullets that might not be readily found anywhere else. So for people like that, it's really helpful. And then, also just to be able to have a pretty good stockpile so that we can get people that ammo is really helpful. And even if people just use it once, that's still better than not using it at all. And especially if they're in prime condor habitat and carcasses are getting consumed by condors, that's one less lead contaminated carcass out there. So every little bit helps. And condors are definitely using those carcasses frequently. So, in our perspective, hunters and ranchers are really the solution to condor recovery. They're not the problem. Lead is the problem. And so there's a lot of great people out there who care about condors or who don't want to see animals suffer, who want to help, but maybe they just can't access the ammo, or they just don't know about it, or it's not readily available where they are. So we're trying to kind of help bridge that gap.
If I may, I'll ask one last question because time's going. Do they have to reach these condors? Do they have to reach a certain age before they actually start mating and reproducing, or at this year, 2 months or whatever, by the time when they leave their parents and are more or less on their own, they start being on their own. They can't start mating and reproducing right away, can they?
No, they can't. So yeah, that picture that I showed earlier of kind of the juvenile and the subadult and the adult is kind of the head coloration kind of progresses with their sexual maturity. So about 5 to 6 years old, we have had birds breed at 5. That's the earliest that we've had birds breed. So they have to be at least 5 years old to breed, and some birds don't breed when they're 5 years old. Like we have a female that just decided to breed this year, and she's 8 years old, so she's breeding for the first time at 8. So anywhere from kind of the 5 to 8 range is pretty typical for a condor to breed for the first time. And similar to humans, they all kind of mature at a slightly different age. So you could have 2 birds that are the exact same age, but one might look a little bit older than the other. It's just maturing at a little bit faster rate. So there's definitely variety there, but yeah, 5 is the earliest they can breed.
And all of those things that are attached, the monitors, the GPSs, do they fall off when the feathers start to molt? Is that when you lose these monitors?
No, so we don't. So the wing tags, the bright colorful tags that you see, the transmitters are attached to that, and that's actually what we call a patagial piercing. So it's actually like similar to an ear piercing. It goes through a really thin membrane in the wing called the patagium, where there's not really a lot going on there. It's like a really thin layer of skin. So it's really similar to your earlobe. It doesn't hurt too bad for the birds. Usually they don't even flinch when we pierce them. And that's what carries the tag. So it's actually there's like a bolt that goes through the wing to hold that tag in place. The tags that do fall off are if we put on a tail transmitter, because we'll actually glue the tag to a tail feather. And so when the bird molts that tail feather and the feather falls off, we lose that tag. But we really use tail tags more as kind of like a backup method. Usually all the birds will at least have a wing tag in addition to the tail tag. But some birds, depending on, similar to your earlobe, if you wear really heavy earrings, your ear holes will kind of stretch out a little bit. And that's the same with the patagium piercings for condors. These birds live a long time. So we have in our flock a 28-year-old bird. He's been wearing a tag for a long time. And so we do take out the tag sometimes when we handle them and kind of let that hole close up. Similar to an ear piercing, if you don't put an earring in for a while, that hole will start to close, and it's the same for them. So we keep track of how those patagial piercings are looking in all our birds. And if we're like, oh, it's getting a little big, we'll just take the tag off, let that wing heal a little bit, and then in a year or two, we'll put a tag back on. So we kind of rotate out tags and use tail tags as needed. But yeah, the those wing tags won't fall off a condor unless, somehow the bolt comes off, but which has happened very rarely, but it's pretty rare to happen. Yeah.
Well, that's great. So the GPS is attached somewhere, not on the tail feathers, but somewhere.
Yeah, the GPS goes on the wing. So if you see a bird, typically if you see a bird with two wing tags, so a tag on each wing, it probably has a radio tag on one wing and a GPS on the other wing. If it only has one tag, it just is wearing a radio tag. Or it could be wearing a GPS tag and it has a tail tag, radio tag on it. But typically we only put GPS on a bird if we can also put a radio tag. Radio tags are the priority. We always want every bird to have one of those. So that definitely goes on first. And then if we're able to, depending on, we prioritize like breeding birds to put GPS on so we can keep track of nests and stuff. But if we have GPS available and we have a bird that's high priority for GPS, then we'll also put a GPS on it. But the GPS would be a wing tag for sure. And then some radio tags can be tail tags, but most of them are wing tags.
Well, Danaé, that was absolutely fascinating, and all the questions that you've answered. Thank you so much for staying with us after your lecture and replying to all these questions and explaining so much more. We certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me. It was, lovely to be here. As I said, I could keep going all night, so I won't keep you guys, but I really appreciate it and appreciate all the questions. And feel free to reach out to me over email if you have follow-up questions. But really, really happy to be here and always happy to talk about condors.
Excellent. I'll be in touch in the next couple of days. So take care. And many, many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Good
great
night,
evening.
everybody. We're going to terminate the Zoom webinar at this point. So I hope you had an enjoyable evening, and we'll see you back in September. So good night, everyone. Cheerio. Right?
Yeah.